What is up, fellas? The Goob here, coming at you with another episode of Rewriting History. Um, I've got 3 topics to talk about today. Gonna talk a little bit more about the 256-year-old man. Gonna talk about the Michigan Relics, which were mentioned in the interview last week with Mark. And going to be talking about the Enochian or Angelic language a little bit. And I don't think I've done so much research for so few facts as I have this week. Spoiler alert, all 3 of these stories, the conclusion is kind of that you can't really draw a whole lot of conclusions. So what is up, Trent? I saw Evan was in the chat last week. I didn't see until after the stream had ended, but that was cool. Good to see Evan in here. Hey, Mr. Galunas. By the way, Mr. Galunas, if you want to be the guest for next week and talk about mounds, let me know. That would be cool if you want to do that next week. Just reach out to me. But yeah, all 3 of these topics are pretty interesting topics. I think they're fun topics, but they're just it's very difficult to actually find anything concrete on any of them. So, anyways, I guess I'll start with Li Qingyuan. I talked about him the other week, and I said I was on board. He's a 256-year-old man. I buy it, and I stand by those statements. So real quick, with these photos, I pulled up this photo last week. This is actually a woman. I believe she's 122 years old. Her age was not confirmed because China didn't have the best record system 122 years ago, but that's a very, very old woman right there. Not Li Qingyuan. As far as I can tell, this is the only photograph that exists of Li Qingyuan, is this one right here. And I don't actually know what year this photograph was taken, but he died in 1933, so obviously before that. So you're looking at a 200-plus-year-old man in this photograph here, and he looks pretty darn good. So, that's your mom. Li Qingyuan died 1933, so he would have been born in like 1680 or so. And there's basically 2 different versions of his life. There's 2 different accounts of his life. Where exactly these accounts come from, I'm not entirely sure. One of them comes from Li Qingyuan. I was trying to find actual sources for this story, and I'm sure they do exist out there somewhere, but in the limited amount of time I had, I wasn't able to find them. And so I didn't get a whole lot more of anything concrete, but here's what I did find. So he was, according to him, he was born about 40 years later than the 256-year-old age that's given to him, which seems to be the age recognized by the Chinese government, because the Chinese government sent him congratulatory letters on his 100th, 150th, and 200th birthdays for his amazing age. And that's roughly 40 years before he claims to have been born. He wrote a book. I don't know if the claim of his age is in the book, or if it's just what he told people, and that's what people remember him saying. But he sets the date about 40 years later, which would put him joining the military at the age of 13 instead of at the age of, 50. All right, Mr. Watson. which at first I was like, that doesn't add up, joining the military at the age of 13. But then you consider that this was the very early 1700s. And he was 7 feet tall as an adult. So at 13 years old, he probably had the stature of an adult at least. And joining the military at 13 years old, maybe not so crazy in the 1700s in China. So especially when you're a giant. So he might have joined the military at 13 years old. Served in the military for something like 40 years, or I think it was 20 years that he served in the military. And then he went off and lived in a village in the mountains. And a professor who also believed his claim of extreme longevity tried to dig into his story. He's the one who uncovered the congratulatory letters from the government, and he also traveled to the village where this guy supposedly lived, and he talked to men that were now men in the village, and they all recalled that their grandfathers told them stories about knowing this man even when they were children. And it's a small village. The guy was 7 feet tall. You probably would be having stories told to your grandchildren about this guy, especially if he's this 7 foot tall guy who doesn't seem to age and just keeps living on forever. So there are some there is some level of veracity to these claims, right? You've got the letters from the government. You have his military service. You have the fact that he's 7 feet tall, and it would be almost impossible for anyone else to assume his identity. It would be impossible for anyone to not notice this guy. He would stand out like crazy. It makes total sense that grandfathers were telling their grandchildren stories about this guy, that in their adulthood, these men still remembered these stories from their grandfather of this 7 foot tall guy that used to live in their village. So I don't know. I still am a believer. He supposedly, again, there's two different accounts of his life. One, he's 40 years younger. One, he's 256 years old. In one, he had 24 wives. In another account, he only had 14 wives, but he outlived all of these wives. It seems like he did have several wives at the very least, a lot more than a normal person would expect to have and to outlive. He wrote a book about his longevity. Him and another guy wrote a book about his immortality or whatever. I think, is this the one? This is by Yang Sen, which I think was this might be, True Accounts of the 250-year-old Man. I believe that's the book he wrote with Yang Sen, and it's about how he became so old. Essentially purposeful living. He moved with purpose and was made sure to go through his, I don't know if it was Qigong or whatever it was, but he went through his movements and his exercises every single day. He had a diet very rich in herbs. Mr. Watson, there's not enough 7 foot tall Chinese guys in China in the 16, 17, 18, and 1900s. You'd be more convincing to me if you were trying to say it was two guys in a big coat that tried to pretend to be this guy. But yeah, he credited his amazing longevity to his actions, his lifestyle, as well as his diet, which was largely herbs. We don't know exactly what herbs. I guess, translating Chinese herb names from rural mountains hundreds of years later isn't an exact science. So, but he ate a lot of herbs. He exercised every single day, walked with purpose, moved with purpose, and Yeah, looking into him, I found several other claims of extreme longevity. There was, like I said, that 122-year-old lady. Um, I believe that would put her at the oldest person ever recorded, if that were true. There were other claims of other people, a lot of claims of life, and most of them are just dismissed because it's like, yeah, when these people were born, we didn't have birth records, so we can't absolutely verify their age, and thus it's just fully dismissed. There's nothing else to it to dismiss it except for that fact. Oh, you're too old. 122 years old is too old to believe, and we don't have absolute proof of your birth, so you don't count. Let me read through these comments real quick, see what you fellas are chatting about. It's done away with my scroll bar again. There we go. Okay, you guys are active today. In the metro, it's in dog years, you know. Yeah, he doesn't really look to have giganticism, as in, or I don't know. He looks like a pretty normal guy, is what I'm getting at. I guess maybe you can look normal with giganticism. I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, he was just a really really tall guy and like healthy guy. You know, he was able to move right. He wasn't. You know how you get these freaks, right? They actually, unfortunately, they are, you know, kind of freaks. They're these super tall guys. Their joints don't work. You know, they're barely able to move. Like they have all these issues because they have some type of disorder. They're not really supposed to be this tall. This guy seems designed to be this tall. Like it seems like that was just his normal genetics, whether he had some Nephilim or whatever in him. Somehow this Chinese guy came out 7 feet tall and like an athletic, normal 7 feet tall. What have I done? Why won't this go away? There we go. Okay. Leeching, not sure what that's about. All lies. China didn't exist before 1954. Yeah, maybe. Uh, yeah, I don't think he had gigantism. Yeah, I mean, the idea of it being his son and his son's son and his son's son, I suppose it's not 100% impossible, but it seems extremely unlikely to me. Most 7 foot tall people don't just pop out 7 foot tall people. Like he was a very, and especially in China, very unique case. I don't know what the average height was back then when he was born and lived, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was significantly shorter than it is now, which it's still incredibly short. Maybe not significantly, but slightly shorter, right? It's really difficult for me to believe this guy was multiple people. And he spent a lot of time in that small village. People remember him. People don't remember him dying and being replaced by his son. They remember him, you know. I don't know. I really do lean towards this one's legit. And I realize it's a crazy claim is from what we're used to, but I don't know. I like this story. Until given evidence that it's not real, I'm gonna choose to believe it's real because it's left in that, you know, gray area of where you can't draw any firm conclusions. So I'm gonna draw the conclusion I like to draw, which is that this guy was legit. Yeah, he was 7 feet and his height never changed. Interesting. The Nazis believed we could live to be 180. I know the Nazis were real into esoteric and occult and all kinds of stuff like that. And there's like I said in my religion episode, so many of the religions talk about ages in the past where we lived thousands of years. So, I don't know. I feel like the Nazis would think higher than 180. All right. So that's the 256-year-old man. I like the story. I lean towards true. There's nothing really firm to say it's real, but I think there's enough circumstantial evidence that I lean towards real. We're talking about 300 years ago, right? Over 300 years ago. 400, no, 3. We're talking about like 350 years ago when this guy was born. Potentially 300 years ago, 350 years ago. So trying to get anything concrete is almost impossible. The fact that the professor went to this village and there were multiple men who claimed that their grandfathers told them stories of him and they remember, these stories. I like it. That's enough for me to like it. So on to the next topic. Which will be the Michigan relics. These are relics that were found in Michigan, and they are very widely regarded as fake. You can see they're pretty cartoonish, childlike looking in their depictions. At least a lot of them are. There were supposedly over 30,000 of these relics found, and you're looking at slate tablets here, but there were clay tablets, there were slate tablets, there were bronze artifacts or copper artifacts, and over 30,000 of them. A lot of them ended up in museums. You see Noah's Ark here. There's a lot going on these tablets. You see the snake and the cross. So a lot of these are in private collections. A lot of these have been destroyed, and a lot of them are, I believe, either sitting in a museum or sitting in Brigham Young University with the Mormons. I don't remember their final destination. They crossed hands a little bit between museums and the Mormons. I think they're now in a museum, or the Mormons, whatever. There is some pretty obvious evidence of forgery taking place with these artifacts. Supposedly, some of the clay tablets, when submerged into water, just dissolved, which you wouldn't expect them to last hundreds of years in Michigan, even buried in the ground. If they dissolve in water, Michigan's a pretty wet place. Some of the slate artifacts appear to be modern pieces of slate from the Detroit slate manufacturing place that, is nearby. When they were inspected, claims were made that there were modern tool marks on them, all kinds of stuff like that. So there were newspaper articles written. There was this journalist who really, for years, pursued this story to try and get evidence that these two guys in Michigan who were finding this stuff were actually creating it. And he never got any hard proof, but he got one of their neighbors in their apartments to say that she could hear banging all day, and that she assumed they were making these forgeries. So were there forgeries? It seems so. On the same token, there are some pretty serious people who have looked at these things and have made the claims that they are legitimate. Here you can see, I don't actually know exactly what script that is, but there's at least 3 different ancient languages used on these tablets. I believe ancient Roman or Greek, cuneiform, and Hebrew as well as some hieroglyphics, even potentially. And so to even try and translate these things, you have to know multiple ancient dead languages. In that same token, to try and forge these things, to try and fake these things, you would have to understand multiple dead and ancient languages. And people have looked at these and claim they have been able to translate them. That's a claim that I'm completely unable to verify myself because I do not speak multiple dead ancient languages. But the same goes for the people who have looked at them and dismissed the writings. The people who have looked at them and dismissed the writings, I don't have access to their actual methodology and research, but just the tone of the dismissal, the words I was hearing and reading from them, didn't seem to me like they had necessarily tried deciphering that many. They kind of looked at it, saw that it was multiple languages, and went, yeah, this is nonsense. But I don't know that for certain. There are biblical events in the category of these having veracity. One person claimed, again, a serious person, claimed that the handwriting on these stones was different. It very evidently was many different people creating this, not just one person. If you had one or two people creating this, you would expect to see consistency within the handwriting. She claimed there wasn't. You have biblical events that were different from the narrative of the time. These were discovered in 1890, I believe. And eventually, we did learn that there were these I don't know if it matches up with the Dead Sea Scrolls exactly. I'm not entirely sure. It's hard to get real information on this, and it's hard to verify any real information on this because looking up, I was trying to find pictures of these stuff, and I found pictures of like a dozen of these tablets and artifacts. They're not all tablets. This is, a box, obviously. Like I said, there's copper artifacts. There were all kinds of artifacts. And I was able to find, a dozen or maybe a couple dozen different examples of these tablets, but trying to find, a real collection of this stuff was very difficult. So not only do I not speak the languages, I can't even find these things. There's supposed to be over 30,000 of them, and I couldn't even find 30 of them. So there's a lot of claims by both sides being made, and I can't verify a single one of them. One of the claims is that, so the religious stuff, right? I don't know if it came from the Dead Sea Scrolls or what exactly, but they were slightly different versions of Christianity than we had in the 1890s. And now we have discovered, oh, hey, these versions did exist in the past. We just didn't know about them. So it does add some veracity to there. Why, if you were forging this stuff, why would you, and you want to forge biblical stories, why change them? And then I guess you got really, really lucky because you happened to change them in the exact way that was later confirmed to be an alternate to the story. It also, a claim being made that there is an eclipse and a meteor. I don't think I have the image pulled up, but there is an image of this tablet online where it's a calendar like this, or, it's a circular calendar, and there's a guy pointing to a spot on the calendar, which would be like the end of March. And so it also showed a full solar eclipse and a meteor at that time. And in 429 AD, I believe, right over that part of Michigan, right where that tablet was found, there was an eclipse and a meteor. So it seems to be referencing real world events. And the theory is that these Coptic Christians who were being persecuted in the early 400s fled and made it all the way to the Americas, and then they created these artifacts. And that also lines up with the fact that these biblical events are depicted differently than how you would expect them to be depicted. Another interesting small fun fact is that you clearly see not perception, but there's depth here, right? There's depth, and that supposedly didn't exist, even though I personally have seen many examples from the ancient world and even prehistoric world. This didn't exist until 1,000 years after this, in the 1400s during the Renaissance. But yeah, you clearly see that there's depth to the images, even though in this, look at the quality of this one looks relatively skilled, and then you look at some of these things look incredibly cartoonish. That one's not even that bad. I mean, Jesus there looks pretty cartoonish. You got Jesus on a cross here. I guess a native being depicted. So again, it sure seems conclusive that there were being fakes made. But does that mean all of these relics are fake? I'm not entirely convinced. The one lady who claimed that the handwriting showed different styles, different people, also sorted these relics into 3 different groups, which was those that contained only text. Those I can't even find a single image of cuneiform writing, or maybe that is cuneiform that I was looking at earlier. I don't even know, but there's tablets. There's Michigan tablets that have exclusively cuneiform writing. They're just tablets full of cuneiform, nothing else, no images. So she sorted it into just writing, and then writing and images, and just images. And you mostly find pictures of these tablets with images on them, and some of them, I mean, that looks like a 3D relief potentially to me. It's hard to tell. But that almost looks like a relief image rather than a carved in image. But if you do look at these, some of these are very amateur looking. The one I showed initially, look at that. That's, I guess it's in stone, so it's hard to judge it exactly the way you would like a pen and paper. But that looks like a child's drawing. Like that legitimately looks like a child's drawing, and this is Genesis. God is speaking into being the sun, the moon, the birds, the animals, everything, right? So clearly a strong Christian narrative with these artifacts. I wish I could find more. I wish I could see more. But all I have to go off of is the claims of these other people who have inspected them. I did watch an interview with an archaeologist who inspected these things, and he didn't seem completely arrogant and completely closed off to the idea that these could have been legit. And he very strongly came away with the conclusion that they were all fakes. I'm quite confident he did not inspect all 30,000 of them, especially since many of those are in private collections. But he did inspect some, and he went to a museum of slate. They have a slate museum, and found some of these tablets. Like one of the tablets was this weird polygon, and it exactly matched the end of a slate sink that was in the museum. So, that along with the clay tablets, the claim of the clay tablets melting in water, and some other things, it seems extremely conclusive that these were forged, some of them at least. Pretty much all of the discovery, or maybe exclusively all of the discovery, happened involving these two guys, Soper and this other guy, whatever his name was. They would have digs sponsored by other people, and they would go out and like locate where to dig, and then people would dig and find these tablets. So if this was a hoax, the person learned multiple dead languages, ancient dead languages, well enough to interweave all three of them and actually be communicating. They buried these all across the state in at least 18 different counties, and I think a couple artifacts may have been found just outside of the state. But across 18 different counties, they buried over 30,000 of these artifacts. They made over 30,000 of these artifacts out of copper, out of stone, out of slate and clay. And then they left them alone at least for long enough so that the ground could appear undisturbed again, and then they could bring people in to dig and think that they were discovering these things for the very first time in hundreds of years. If it's a hoax, and then also if the claim of that solar eclipse, and I've seen that tablet, there is what appears to be a calendar, and there is very clearly a solar eclipse and a comet and a person pointing to a point on that calendar. Is that truly referencing a solar eclipse and comet that happened in 429 AD in Michigan? Maybe. It kind of seems like maybe it is, and if it is, and that's a forgery, like, man, the dedication to learning the languages, referencing real-world events from over 1,000 years ago, in matching them up with the location, and then going across 18 counties and burying them all. It's a lot. It's a lot. It'd be one of the most impressive hoaxes ever, I think. On the flip side, you do have these slate pieces that perfectly do match up with modern slate. You have claims of clay tablets melting when they're in water. You have a neighbor who reported hearing banging constantly, like sounds of chiseling from their apartment all day forever, pretty much, because this went on for like 30 years. We're, again, 30,000 artifacts. And one of the most condemning pieces, but take this with a grain of salt, is that no more of these have ever been found since these two guys died. So since these two guys stopped helping people dig up these artifacts, no more have been found. I say take that with a grain of salt because these things have already been so widely dismissed. There are 30,000 of them. If someone did claim to find one and it popped up, I could very easily see it getting dismissed. Someone might explain it away as, oh yeah, that's one of the 30,000 artifacts. Congrats, you found one. You didn't dig it up out of the ground, or someone placed it there again, or whatever. Like the idea of it getting fully ignored and dismissed is very likely to me. So no more have been found, or have they? Hard to say. What do you guys think about the Michigan artifacts, the Michigan relics? Let's see. Who is Eileen Towardsreal? Who is Eileen Towardsreal? I don't think I've heard of that name. Come on, Eileen. Yeah, call in. Did I miss a call? I don't know if I did, but feel free to call in, Mr. Galunas. Watson, you've called in before. You've called in before, Mr. Watson. Yeah. So, all right. The final topic is Here's another little collection of these tablets. Those look like clay to me, you know. But where is I had I thought more image. There it is. Okay, so the Enochian language, which is a bit of a misnomer. It is not the Enochian language, it's the Angelic language, according to John Dees and Edward Kelly, who created this language, or at least introduced this language to the world. You can see a little bit of it right here. It's pretty unrecognizable, pretty alien. And this was supposedly the original language, the language spoken by God to bring the world into form. We were looking at that tablet a minute ago where God is speaking. I think it was on here. Yeah, God's speaking into existence the world and the animals and everything else. And so that original language is what the angelic language supposedly is, the Enochian language. And if you guys want a full episode on John Dees and Edward Kelly, let me know. You're calling it a bad time. This is you call back in 2 minutes. I accepted you, but unless you can do your whole call in 2 minutes, you're gonna have to call back, Mr. G. So yeah, this Enochian language, this angelic language, was the original language. It is the language of power. It is not just descriptors. When we say chair, we're making sounds to describe a chair. But in this angelic language, the word for chair would be the chair. It has the power of chair. You could manifest a chair or whatever, right? If that makes any sense. What's up, Mr. G? How you doing?
What's up, buddy? This thing didn't give me any notice saying I was in here, so I'm in here?
Yeah, you're in here, but you have a minute and a half before it hangs up, and you'll have to call back on the next meeting.
All right. So, listen, you were just talking about the Michigan Relics, right?
Yeah.
And so there was this cave. It's called Burroughs Cave, I believe, in Illinois. And there's a fella on the interwebs on YouTube. I think his name is Harry Hubbard. And there's another guy, Harry Hubbard, I think is a guy who claims to have went in there. And I think that's where a lot of these Egyptian type relics that people claim to have found it. Other stones, like you were saying, that have maybe multiple dead languages on them, are supposedly have been found in there. I didn't really do any research on it lately, but I remember watching or checking out a lot about it. It seemed interesting because there's a lot of these things where they claim to find this stuff that is written in dead languages. And when you said that around 400 BC or 400 AD number, right? There's a lot of stuff that seems to be in that area between the mounds, between the what's the other stuff? Maybe not the chambers so much. Definitely the mounds that date to that time too. You know what I mean?
Yeah, which makes sense according to the theory with the stones, which is that the Christians were getting persecuted and they fled and made it all the way to America. So that would be when they're showing up to the Americas.
Right.
Yeah.
And it would make.
Oh, that's the end of that. All right, so let me start that again. Mr. Galunas, call back. Definitely call back. I'll get the new link posted in just a second here. Get myself back in the meeting real quick. Admit. All right, let me copy this invite link and I liked my video, so I can actually access my own video now if I go through my liked videos. It doesn't show up on my page, but I copied the link from a different YouTube earlier and liked it so that I could get back to it. So here we go, posting that, and I'll go ahead and pin it since I'm here. The replace pinned message. All right, Mr. Galunas, give me a call back. Let's continue our chat. What I was saying about the Enochian language earlier is that if you guys want an episode about John Dees and Edward Kelly, their lives are very, very interesting. They the more I was doing research into this, the more I was just like, man, this is getting more and more interesting. I'm talking treasure hunting. I'm talking, trouble with the law. Every good adventure cliche all crammed into one. It is really a hell of a story. Dude worked for the Queen, all kinds of stuff. So if you want an episode just dedicated to their lives and background and stuff, let me know. I think it could be pretty interesting. Yeah. And depending on... Oh, I haven't joined my audio on here. There you go. Now you should be able to hear me, and I think I can hear you. So we're back.
All right.
So you had talked about...
Man, I'm having that trouble again.
I hear you all right. You should be able to hear me.
My microphone is unmuted.
Oh, I thought I had unmuted myself. Now you should be able to hear me.
Yes, I can hear you, sir. Are we back?
Yep.
For this new modern technology, you know what I'm saying?
Sorry, I thought I had clicked it, but I hadn't actually clicked it.
Yeah, I know how that goes. That's always the case too. Or the plug isn't plugged all the way in properly, right?
Yeah.
So, anywho, it seems to be there's a lot of these anomalies that come up around that era, and they also ironically start kind of in the wrong direction, that they're in the South and in the East, a lot of them, where all of the stories about how we traditionally have peopled this side of the world did not start there, so the older dates shouldn't be there. And it's just weird. There was also this thing about in Ireland that a bunch of people left, or maybe in the Welsh in England, right? You were talking about that the other day in your interview with the one fella. And
yeah, the Irish weren't necessarily fleeing. They just loved Jesus so much that they were like, we have to tell everybody. And yeah,
Okay, well, in that case, I did...
Same thing, though, basically.
Right, where that there was some trouble in a certain spot. I'll have to look again, and that a lot of people left one specific area at one specific time in Ireland. And then, then all this stuff that shows up, like that seems to be attributed to the Welsh, starts showing up then. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And I don't even know if those two terms are interchangeable, if the Irish and the Welsh.
Yeah, there's a lot of names that they go by.
Yeah.
Celts, Welsh, Irish.
Okay, yeah. So it's interesting though, and then the parallels with the things here. You know what I mean? The stone structures that seem to be reminiscent of them, or those the type of dwellings, tattooed people, the certain words, that all show up around the same time. It's neat.
Yeah.
What was the other thing I was going to say? So, yeah, right. And that was the same thing I had heard about. The two guys were counterfeiting, or had been the two fellas that found all of those Michigan relics, right?
Or they were involved in some way in the finding of them, yeah.
Right. And there was another person that had gone out, and I'm not sure if he was a guy from the Smithsonian that was paying people for this stuff. And, that could have been like...
I think the Brigham Young University, I think it was a Mormon who was doing that.
Okay, all the way back then?
Yeah.
Yeah, that would make sense. Okay, right. And that's the other thing, too, is like whenever you find any stuff that's any kind of legitimate, quote-unquote, research done into this sort of stuff in the Americas, it's usually done by the Mormons, because they're looking for archaeological evidence of their story,
Right.
And they have a lot of money to do it, so.
And some of them were fully convinced, took it to their deathbed that, yeah, this stuff's real, there were also non-Mormons, like the people I was referencing earlier who I didn't provide names or background for, but they were, well-respected people with good good professional
Right.
backgrounds, and they weren't Mormons, and they believed it as well. So
Right. And here's the thing too. I mean, like what you were saying about those languages. I mean, that takes a special kind of person to get those right. You know, the real question would
the
be what was the
Coptics.
context in which the words were written, right? Did the sentences make sense? Was it something that would have made sense, or was it just a couple of words because they were, you know, the proper language and we put them in a row?
And you get claims from both sides making both claims. And so the people who are claiming to have translated it, they are claiming to have actually translated it and pulled information from it. The people who are claiming that it's gibberish, I mean, how do you prove it's gibberish? I guess that's a hard thing to prove, right? But like just the way it was worded, it sounded kind of like, yeah, there's multiple different languages on one tablet, so obviously it's just gibberish, is kind of what I got from it.
Yeah, me too. Me too. And I think a lot of people, they go in, you know, with that Clovis first mentality, right? And so it shouldn't be here. Why would I pay it any? Why would I give it any authentic? You know, they come with their with their mind made up, or really.
Right, and translating, even if you know the languages, translating multiple ancient dead languages is not a simple, you know, just sit down and read it kind of task.
Yeah, right. And who's going to be doing that? And like you said, I never thought about that either. Like, who's going to, I mean, I guess we don't have any testimonies of the people that were there on the crew that dug it up and, you know, were they digging experts and knew what, you know, undisturbed ground
They were, like, actually. There was, again, they were found across like 18 different counties. There were a lot of different digs, but yes, they often, that was part of the scam, right, is that they would get sponsors and then bring in actual professional like archaeologists to dig this stuff up and discover it, and that was a lot of what added, you know, to their veracity at the time.
That's right. My question would be, how would they have gone down with it to trick them, though, you know? Or was it like a quick sleight of hand and all of a sudden they threw something in? But even still, you'd have to make it look like it was there, like you said.
One of the guys supposedly was an expert in sleight of hand, or at least had some skills in sleight of hand. Wow. But yeah, you know, to do it 30,000+ times and
that's good.
To convince them every time, and all these guys are experts. They do know what they're looking for, and they're going, yeah, this looks like it's been in the earth for hundreds of years, and we just dug it up.
Right. Yeah,
I'm not saying it's impossible, but...
Right. I think the weird thing, or the cool thing, is that a lot of this stuff is available in small little museums because they don't think it's, you know, quote unquote, they don't think it's real. So you can go see a lot of this stuff. You know, you just got to dig out the little mom and pop museum that has it, you know.
Yeah. I think they, at least some of them are on display. Again, I don't remember if it's the BYU or the or the museum that it eventually ended up at, but one of those places, I think you can go view at least some of them.
Or nice. All right, cool, dude. Hey, I'll give you a call later on, or I'll you know, talk to you tomorrow. Then we'll get things going for the next week.
Yeah. Or is that next week, or is that in 2 days?
No. For the thing you talk about, but yes, on Tuesday you and I.
Okay.
All right, I'll talk to you later, Tater.
Cool beans.
Bye.
Yeah. So the lives of John Dees and Edward Kelly, the guys who wrote the Angelic script, are extremely interesting. It is like a really, really well written movie or story or book or whatever. You know, it's pretty wild. But this is the Angelic language, as is, where's this right here, which this is, I believe, a translation, because you're seeing you know, our letters and our numbers on here, but there were these squares. This gets complicated. I'm going to try and break it down as best I can. So John Dees was a magus for Queen Elizabeth. He was a big deal. He was extremely well respected. He was a real smart guy. He was a nerd for the Queen, essentially. And he was trying to contact angels trying to get knowledge from angels, tried several different people who claimed they could communicate with angels, didn't have any luck until he met this guy named John Dees. And then they began a very prolific career where this really, really well-respected, very highly intelligent guy, he wrote the Manus Hieroglyphica, which is this. I tried reading it, actually. I tried reading the Manus Hieroglyphica in my research for this, but it's way too esoteric for me. I'll pull up an image for it real quick. You might have seen this symbol before. This little symbol right here. This little symbol right here is the Manus Hieroglyphica, which was John Dee's attempt of a unified theory of everything, essentially. So John Dees believed in this original language, this language of power, this magical language where words actually are reality, essentially. And this was connected to that. This was his first attempt, I suppose, at creating this unifying structure. And this is supposed to be the moon, the little, you can see it a little bit better probably on this one, right? So that's the moon there, the crescent, and then you have the sun, which is the center, or the focus, not the center, because the center point is the earth. The sun and the planets revolve around the earth. And then you have the cross, which symbolizes all of the things that the cross symbolizes, which is not really Christian stuff. It's much more esoteric than that. And then down here is, I guess, the a star sign. I don't remember which one. Like I said, I tried reading the book. It was a bit much for me. It didn't seem to have Aries. I thought it was Aries. I just didn't want to say that because I wasn't sure. I didn't know what the heck it was talking about. It wasn't gibberish to me. I didn't know what it was talking about. So didn't do me a whole lot of good. But that symbol to him was his first attempt at this unification of symbols and sounds and words and reality. This was supposed to encompass everything. According to him, this was like the grand unified theory of everything, was that symbol. So he was already looking for this. Like I said, he was trying to communicate with angels through other people because he recognized he didn't have the ability to communicate with angels. And then he finds John Dees. And John Dees ends up writing this 49-page book full of these squares here. And it's written in Enochian. This is, like I said, a translation, it would seem. But imagine, squares, 49 pages front and back, like this, filled out with these foreign symbols. And this book, this was the first thing that they did together, John Dees and Edward Kelly. Edward Kelly being the one to actually write all of this information. So John Dees is the genius, and this random guy, Edward Kelly, that he meets, is now writing this, okay? And the claim is that if you decode these squares, you get all of the prophecies of you get a lot of information, but part of it is the prophecy of the end of the world. It spells out the end times. And a lot of people believe that when we finally do translate in complete translation of these squares, that it'll actually bring about the end times. There have been some attempts at translating these squares. None have been fully successful. After this book, they created the Enochian language. So the first book is just squares. There are, you can see up top, there are some words. There's some titles at the top. not the English words, but these other words up here. But other than that, other than the titles of these squares, they're just the squares. After that book, they made more books that were actually cohesive, readable texts, except for the fact that they were in a completely alien language. They had symbols, you saw the symbols in the book there that are unrecognizable, words that are unrecognizable, syntax that is unrecognizable. So languages have patterns, languages have syntax, languages have root words, right? And all of the angelic text is completely different from other languages. It doesn't share the same root words, it doesn't share the same patterns, but it does have its own root words, it does have its own patterns and syntax, and it can be translated. And so they didn't write the Book of Enoch, and in fact, it's thought that they shouldn't even have access to the Book of Enoch in that time because it hadn't made its way from Ethiopia to the rest of the world yet. So the Book of Enoch was originally part of the Bible, and then it got removed a very, very long time ago by the Catholic Church, most likely, and taken out of the Bible, but it was kept in Ethiopia for all of this time. The Ethiopians preserved it in their churches, and then eventually now we have the Book of Enoch again across the whole world, but there was a very long time where it really was only secretly existing in Ethiopia. So they shouldn't have even had access, hypothetically, to the Book of Enoch, and yet he writes this addition to the Book of Enoch. He writes these stories that are supplemental to the Book of Enoch, these stories that he shouldn't even know in the first place. And I don't really remember where I was going with that. He wrote stuff that was supplemental to the Book of Enoch. And he did it in a very short period of time. So these sessions, he would be channeling these angels. And again, if you want me to get into the actual stories of these guys' lives and the stories of the channeling, it's absolutely fascinating. I'll give you a small tidbit. There's one where he, writes down this stuff in the angelic language, and then he makes the mistake of reading it verbally out loud. And in doing so, because these are words of power, these are the magic words of the original language, he summons a couple of angels that then beat him up with angelic shovels. And that's a very small taste of the strangeness that is these guys' story. It's a great story. But let me know if you want that. I'll do an episode just about their story if you want. But yeah, he would be channeling these angels. They'd be feeding him this information. And I don't know how much you guys write, but it's really difficult to just sit down and write. You're just writing and writing and writing, and actually coming out with anything that's coherent, much less good. It's this story that fits in. Like I said, it's supplemental to the Book of Enoch. It works. A lot of people accept it as actual, angelic revelations. So it's not just like this incoherent nonsense or this really poorly written stuff. It's he's sitting down and just writing pages and pages and pages at a time of this incredible story, and then he's doing so in a completely made up language, or at least foreign language at the very least, right? Which is pretty wild. Again, this guy wasn't the genius John Dees. This wasn't the genius John Dees who worked for the Queen. This was just some guy that John Dees ran into, Edward Kelly, who seemingly, if he's not channeling angels on the spot, made up this incredibly complex these incredibly complex squares, as well as an entirely new alphabet, entirely new language with entirely new patterns and root words, and then was able to write it fluently and like stream of consciousness these stories that actually work and fit. So yeah, the in looking into this, because to me that sounds rather impossible, at least if you accept it on its face. And you don't necessarily have to accept it on its face. Maybe you don't think that this was just written over the course of several days. But even if it was taken a long time to create this stuff, even if it was crafted, just the idea of creating your own unique language is hard for me to imagine. But in looking into this, I found that there are several examples of people doing just that, people creating their own unique languages. And this is one of the most famous examples and probably one of the most impressive examples. Like I said, it doesn't borrow root words from other languages, but it has its own. The syntax supposedly was somewhat similar to English, but it also had like similarities to Hebrew in that there were the way Hebrew works is there's like number and word meanings. It had that same kind of thing going on, but not like Hebrew syntax and patterns and stuff. It's a very, very impressive language if created. And you've probably heard of the Voynich manuscripts, which is another potential made-up language which has yet to be translated. And I meant to bring this up when I was talking about the Michigan tablets, because there's several different people who have claimed to have successfully translated several different versions of the Voynich manuscript. So there are people out there claiming to have solved the mystery and to have translated it, and then many other people making the same claim. And so obviously these people aren't translating it. They haven't actually cracked the code, because you're not getting a coherent story out of this 7 different ways. They make the claim, but they can't really back up the claim. So going back to these people with the tablets who claim, oh yeah, I've translated this, or even the ones on the flip side who are being like, oh yeah, I tried translating it and it was incoherent. Take that stuff with a big grain of salt. Even though they're going, oh yeah, like there's this specific story about an eclipse and a meteor on this specific date, this and that actually happened, so this is proving it's true. And some of the other claims, where it's people are gonna make claims, and yeah, that's just that. So let me see what you guys have been talking about. You've been talking a lot again. Did I freeze? Oh, you're talking about the Zoom. Yeah, Cheddarman. No, I don't think it was Cheddarman. But a lot of those men, again, I don't even know which one to believe, and I haven't looked into every story individually. But like Lucy, for example, that's supposedly not actually Lucy. It was an amalgamation of different, animal bones and human bones, and like 47 different people or something like that. You got the other claims of other men. There's what's the Dakota man? Doesn't quite sound right, but he's like this 10,000-year-old guy who was found in America, and then I guess that was just a single tooth that was found, and then some people claim it wasn't even a human tooth that was found. So whether to believe the initial claim or the later debunking, I don't know, but either way, it just goes to show the dubiousness of the science, right? And you get all these articles, 10,000 articles, especially now with AI, you literally get 10,000 articles. But you get all these articles talking about these discoveries, and it gets put out into the ether, and it becomes a part of the zeitgeist, and people just accept this new fact. And they accept this new fact to the point that it blocks the actual facts. You never hear the actual truth that's conflicting with these made up facts, because people immediately dismiss the actual truth because, well, I know the Dakota man was 10,000 years old, or I know Lucy, or whatever it might be, right? And so whichever side you take on that, though, it's like science can't agree on a single thing, the science, and it's just incredibly dubious, these claims, and they're made on incredibly flimsy ground, and then they just get put out as facts, and they get repeated until they're accepted, and then they're accepted to the point that they can't be contradicted. And even when you have actual facts that contradict them, you go, no, you don't. No, you don't. We already have the facts. So you're upset that I'm not going against the mainstream hard enough? Microbial load is my jam. All right. Welsh are the true Brits. Oh, I think there's, you were talking about languages in the Welsh and stuff. One of the interesting things, I think there's a whole bunch of Eskimo words that are like one for one with Welsh words. There's a decent number. It might be like 38 words, which isn't a crazy amount, but exact same meaning, exact same pronunciation. It's enough to make you go, I think. So just one more little connection. Abraham wasn't cool? Why wasn't Abraham cool? What was wrong with Abraham? He spoke Enochian, or this angelic language, in the Enoch was supposedly the last person. That's why it's known as the Enochian language and the Enochian texts, even though that's not at all what they called them. It's just associated with the Book of Enoch, because the stories are related, and because Enoch was supposedly the last person to speak this language. So yeah, Abraham would have spoken it as well. We do need more babies. They are delicious. That is what you meant, right? Americentric. What's is claiming that Celts and Coptics from ancient times made it to the Americas Americentric? I don't think that is. I think that might be the opposite of Americentric. But yeah, I don't remember how clear I made that idea. But these Coptic Christians who were getting pursued in the early 400s, they would have very potentially had knowledge of all of the languages that were being used on the Michigan tablets. So, you see this weird amalgamation of languages. It doesn't add up. Well, it fits with the Coptics. You see this weird religious translation that doesn't match, those from the 1890s when these were found. That also very potentially lines up with the Coptics. So it's like, it's a weird story because it's so hard to verify anything. Even the claims of fakery, you're just taking people's word on it. It's really hard to even find images of a lot of these things. I did find some images, and like I said, I saw images of the one tablet being compared to the end of this slate sync, and it sure did seem to be the exact same piece, just someone had scribbled on one of them. So, it does definitely seem that forgeries were made. I kind of suspect that maybe a lot of the forgeries were just the picture versions. I'm not really sure. I don't know. It's hard. It's honestly hard to draw conclusions about it. It's just hard because the more I go back and forth, the more I find it just conflicts. It all conflicts. If it is a forgery, though, if it is 100% fake, it's unbelievably impressive. That's really my only conclusion, I guess, is that if it is totally fake, these guys went through so much effort, and so much effort that I think largely was totally unrecognized and unappreciated. And they did it for like 30 years straight. So crazy hoax if it's all fake. But yeah, all right. Well, I think that's the episode, fellas. It's been over an hour. So I'll catch you guys next week. Mr. Galunas, I don't know if you do want to be a guest next week, potentially for if you've got an hour's worth of mound talk to go over, or if you need more time to prepare, if you want to do it some other week, whatever. Just let me know, man. We'll get that set up. So that sounds like a fun time. And I'll catch you fellas later.